Part two of how to stop being manipulated and what's the advice you would give to maybe somebody you cared about if you're trying to help them to stop being manipulated, succumb to the influences around them to make decisions that they don't want to make. Whether that's about romance or whether that's about something more serious in their life about spending, or maybe it's about even the decisions they make on an ongoing basis. How do you help people with their decisions to help them to really move forward in a powerful way? Today is our second lesson on this topic. To do a quick little review of what we covered yesterday, let me just pull those up for us real quick. Number one, we covered reciprocity. Number two, we covered, in just a brief review, reciprocity was just the notion that be mindful of the people who are aiming to give to you. When something is free, be aware of that being something that psychologically incentivizes you to be influenced to want to give back to that entity or to that person, to that organization. That's just what happens. Number two, we talked about consistency. And this is the analogy we used in this space, is if you don't see yourself being married to somebody and with their character or the way they carry themselves, then don't go on that first date, right? The first date can lead to another date, and then maybe lead to an exclusive relationship, which that might lead to engagement, which might lead to marriage. But if you want to stop that whole process from the get-go, you don't say yes to the date. But anything you say yes to at a lower level gives you a lot more incentives to say yes at a higher level. That's from in the market, in the business place, but also it's true in relationships. Number three, we talked about liking. That's positioning yourself. That's if you're on the business side, it's positioning yourself as similar to your customers, to your clients, being relatable. We talked about body mirroring, understanding the emotions on the other side. We talked about all of those concepts, and we talked about being like the people. Again, if you're on the other side of it, you're trying to make decisions, you're trying to have people not influence you, then it's the other end of it. Then it's being mindful when somebody's aiming to be like you or to be similar to you, if they have the incentive of trying to sell to you. Again, if you don't want to be sold to, you don't want to spend as much, then these are the principles to be aware of. That's number three. Now we're going to move on to point number four, which it's just relevant. It continues to be relevant, and we're going to actually read an experiment that was done. It's a well-known experiment done by a man named Milgram, and we're going to read. It's known as the Milgram experiment. Something you could Google and look up on your own. So what I'm going to do here is pull up. Number one, I'm going to pull up the article we're going to read together. We'll go through that together, and then we'll take some insights from that article, because we're talking about the topic of authority. So we'll get that pulled up here on the screen. So we're talking about authority. So let's read together an article over on simplypsychology.org. We'll read his study, and then we'll see if we can make some conclusions based on that insight. So let me make sure I get this done right, and we'll go from here. There we go. And all right, we are set to go. All right, I know this one has a few ads popping up, but let's go ahead and read through this, and then we'll get a chance to have some discussion about this content. It says, the Milgram shock experiment. One of the most famous studies of obedience in psychology was carried out by Stanley Milgram, a psychologist at Yale University. He conducted an experiment focusing on the conflict between obedience to authority and personal conscience. Milgram, 1963, examined justifications for acts of genocide offered by those accused at the World War II Nuremberg War criminal trials. Their defense often was based on obedience, that they were just following orders from their superiors. The experiments began in July 1961, a year after the trial of Adolf Eichmann in Jerusalem. Milgram devised the experiment to answer the question, could it be that Eichmann and his million accomplices in the Holocaust were just following orders? Could we call them all accomplices? Milgram wanted to investigate whether Germans were particularly obedient to authority figures, as this was a common explanation for the Nazi killings in World War II. Milgram selected participants for his experiment by newspaper advertising for male participants to take part in a study of learning at Yale University. Here's where I think it gets more interesting. It says the procedure was that the participant was paired with another person, and they drew lots to find out who would be the learner and who would be the teacher. The draw was fixed so that the participant was always the teacher and the learner was one of Milgram's confederates pretending to be a real participant. The learner was taken into a room who had electrodes attached to his arms, and the teacher and researcher went into a room next door that contained an electric shock generator and a row of switches marked 15 volts to 375 volts to 450 volts. Here's the aim. Milgram was interested in researching how far people would go in obeying instruction if it involved harming another person. That's really what we're talking about here. Is he was trying to assess if he directed a participant to inflict harm on another person, how far would that person go in following the orders, inflicting pain on another person? That's the whole thing. All right. Then it goes, volunteers were recruited for a controlled experiment investigating learning, or the ethics deception. Participants were 40 males aged between 20 and 50 whose jobs ranged from unskilled to professional from the New Haven area. They were paid $4.50 for just turning up. At the beginning of the experiment, they were introduced to another participant who was a confederate of the experimenter. They drew straws to determine their roles, learner and teacher. Although this was fixed and the confederate was always the learner, this was also an experimenter dressed in a gray lab coat, played by an actor. 2 rooms in the Yale Interaction Laboratory were used, one for the learner and another for the teacher and experimenter with an electric shock generator. So if you can begin to picture really what this is describing, it's painting the picture that there is truly one person who's in the dark. They don't know what's happening. They're just following the direction. They showed up for the $450. They're a participant in the study. They show up. In a separate room is here is for the teacher and the experimenter. Sorry, maybe I messed that up. So the actor is the one hooked up to the electric devices. That's an inside person. He's in on the experiment. Then there's the teacher, and then there's a person who's sitting at the shock generator. So if you can imagine those 3 positions. The learner was strapped to a chair with electrodes. And mind you, this is the actor who's involved in this. After he has learned a list of word pairs given him to learn, the teacher tests him by naming a word and asking the learner to recall its partner pair from a list of 4 possible choices. The teacher is told to administer an electric shock every time the learner makes a mistake. Again, the teacher is the one who is in the dark or doesn't know about what's really happening with the experiment. Here's the image you can see here. Here's the student, the teacher. Can you see my cursor? You cannot. It's not popping up. But it's right here in the middle of the screen. So if you're looking at it, then it's actually right around here. So actually I can move this ever so briefly. So it's right there. There's an experimenter, there's the teacher, and there is the students. All right, let's get into it. The learner mainly gave wrong answers on purpose, and for each of these, the teacher gave him an electric shock. Again, remember, the teacher is the one that's in the dark. When the teacher refused to administer a shock, the experimenter was to give a series of orders, prods, to ensure they continued. So the experimenter, also in on it, is telling the teacher, no, you keep going, keep testing the student, and when the student is wrong, continue to give that student the shock. There were 4 prods, and if one was not obeyed, then the experimenter, read out the next prod. Experimenter is the one dressed in the lab coat. That's going to be significant. You'll see in a second. There were 4 prods, and if one was not obeyed, then the experimenter read out the next prod, and so on. Prod 1 was please continue. Prod 2 is the experiment requires you to continue. Prod 3 is it is absolutely essential that you continue. And prod 4, you have no other choice but to continue. So these are the kind of language the experimenter would give to the teacher to continue, 1, testing the student, and 2, administering the shock to the student. The results. Here's where this stuff gets crazy. 65%, 2/3 of participants continued to the highest level of 450 volts. So even though there was some hesitation, that experimenter, again, this person who came in for this study continued to shock the student. And again, we're back to this image right here. The teacher continued to shock the student when the student was incorrect. When they became uncomfortable, the 4 prods were used. The conclusion that how and why 65% of participants would continue to the highest level of 450 volts. Let's read the conclusion together, and then we're going to kind of make some real world conclusions based on this insight. This is the individual explanation for the behavior of the participants would be that it was something about them as people that caused them to obey. But a more realistic explanation is that the situation they were in influenced them and caused them to behave in the way they did. Some of the aspects of the situation that may have influenced their behavior include the formality of the location, the behavior of the experimenter, and the fact that it was an experiment for which they had volunteered and been paid. Ordinary people are likely to follow orders given by an authority figure. That's key. Given to the extent of killing an innocent human being. Obedience to authority is ingrained in us all from the way we were brought up. People tend to obey orders from other people if they recognize their authority as morally right and or legally based. This response to legitimate authority is learned in a variety of situations. For example, in family, school, and the workplace. Milgram summed up in the article, The Perils of Obedience, writing, the legal and philosophic aspects of obedience are of enormous import, but they say very little about how most people behave in concrete situations. I set up a simple experiment at Yale University to test how much pain an ordinary citizen would inflict on another person simply because he was ordered to by an experimental scientist. Stark authority was pitted against the subject's strongest moral imperatives against hurting others. And with the subject's ears ringing with the screams of the victims, authority won more often than not. That's that 65% mentioned earlier. The extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of the study, and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. It keeps going. Milgram explained the behavior of his participants by suggesting that people have 2 states of behavior when they are in social situation. The autonomous state and the agentic state. So the autonomous state is the people who direct their own actions and take responsibility for the results of those actions. The agentic state, people allow others to direct their actions and then pass off the responsibility for the consequences to the person giving the orders. In other words, they act as agents for another person's will. Milgram suggested that 2 things must be in place for a person to enter the agentic state. The person giving the orders is perceived as being qualified. This is so crucial. The person giving the orders is perceived, again, think about that word, perceived as qualified to direct other people's behavior. That is, that they are seen as legitimate. Again, we're going to talk about the gray lab coat, the wardrobe, how you carry yourself, how you speak, how you're dressed, what you drive. All of these things are factors. Number 2, the person being ordered about is able to believe that the authority will accept responsibility for what happens. So again, it's almost like, hey, it's not my fault. It's the authority who was directing me or commanding me. Agency theory says that people will obey an authority when they believe that the authority will take responsibility for the consequences of their action. This is supported by some aspects of Milgram's evidence. For example, when participants were reminded that they had responsibility for their own actions, almost none of them were prepared to obey. Fascinating. In contrast, many participants who were refusing to go on did so if the experimenter said that he would take responsibility. All right, here's some variations. And so again, if you're rocking with me so far, stay with me, and we're gonna make this all relevant for in the world of manipulation, in the world of persuasion, in the world of influence. It says the Milgram experiment was carried out many times whereby Milgram varied the basic procedure. By doing this, Milgram could identify which factors affected obedience. Obedience was measured by how many participants shocked to the maximum 450 volts. In total, 636 participants have been tested in 18 different variation studies. All right, here's some few details. Uniform. In the original baseline study, the experimenter wore a gray lab coat as a symbol of his authority. Milgram carried out a variation in which the experimenter was called away because of a phone call right at the start of the procedure. The role of the experimenter was then taken over by an ordinary member of the public in everyday clothes rather than a lab coat. Now here's this relevance. The obedience level dropped to 20%. Again, okay, imagine this. If the guy had a gray lab coat, was the one giving the orders, the obedience was at 65%, to the point of the maximum voltage of shocking the student. And mind you, I'm not sure if this article says it or not, but the student was an actor, and all of the shocking was all fake and pretended. But that the fake actor pretending as a student wasn't the true one being examined. It was how far the teacher would go in giving the shock to the student when he was directed by the person in perceived authority who had the lab coat. But just think about this. So just the lab coat changed and the roles swapped out, then the obedience dropped by 45%. Change of location is also relevant. The experiment was moved to a set of rundown offices rather than the impressive Yale University. Obedience dropped to 47.5%. This suggests that status of location affects obedience. I remember when I was getting trained with the John Maxwell team, and they're trying to teach us how to be able to close more business. And they were talking about leveling up with where you actually have these potential client meetings. And there's one thing for meeting at Starbucks and another thing meeting at the best steakhouse in town. Location matters, and there's quite a bit of science that goes along with that. All right, let's keep going. Here's another factor. The two-teacher condition. This is crazy. When participants could instruct an assistant to press the switches, 92.5% shocked to the maximum 450 volts. When there is less personal responsibility, obedience increases. This relates to Milgram's agency theory. So if you think about this, is if the teacher being studied and examined in this role, if they didn't have to be the one pressing the switches for the shocks, their obedience went all the way up to 92.5%. Because it was almost like, well, I'm not the one pressing the shock, somebody else is. I'm directing them to, but it's almost like they almost seem to be like less, more absolved. Like, hey, I'm not guilty here. Somebody else is actually pressing the shock button, and it's not me. Again, this is just crazy. Touch proximity condition. The teacher had to force the learner's hand down onto a shock plate when they refused to participate after 150 volts. Obedience fell to 30%. The participant is no longer buffered, protected from seeing the consequences of their actions. So, again, a factor not as relevant as what we're going to be talking about today. All right, social support condition. 2 other participants were also teachers, but refused to obey. Confederate 1 stopped at 150 and Confederate 2 stopped at 210. The presence of others who are seen to disobey the authority figure reduces the level of obedience to 10%. Okay, so just the presence of another person who was not willing to go down that path. Think about this from a peer pressure perspective. If you have one person who takes a stand, it emboldens the people around it. That's why the people you choose is so important. Okay. Absent experimental condition, it is easier to resist the orders from an authority figure if they are not close by. Interesting. Proximity, relevant when it comes to COVID, working in office, working at home. When the experimenter instructed and prompted the teacher by telephone from another room, obedience fell to 20.5%. Dang it, think about that. From telephone to being in person, and there's a what is that? About 45% drop in obedience. Many participants cheated and missed out shocks or gave less voltage in order to by the experimenter. The people, they were prone to cheat when the experimenter was not in the room. The proximity of an authority figure affects obedience. Okay, so you could get into this and go down the rabbit hole. It's, I think, very, very fascinating. Why did we read all of this? We read it because it's relevant in the arena of not being manipulated. In that story, you had somebody, there was so much, again, we said it was location, it was the person who seemed to have the perceived authority. This is perceived authority, it's not even not actual authority. So if I was working with the business and we were talking about what helps them to become more influential in the marketplace, we would be purposefully thinking about wardrobe, how they carry themselves. I mean, again, I'm breaking one of the rules from now, right? So we had 2 T-ball games earlier today. So I went from the T-ball games to home, and I'm transitioned into being able to do some live streaming. So breaking one of the rules today, but the idea is, does the wardrobe make a difference? Does your outfit make a difference? And the answer is absolutely. You may not want it to. I may not want it to make a difference, but it does make a difference. I remember even when I was walking into Valero one day, I was in my full suit, tie and everything, and I walked in, and me and another gentleman were walking in at the same time, and he said, "Let me get the door for you. You're clearly more important than me." But mind you, he had no data except for the outfit that I had on. So he got the door, I laughed, we laughed, and then we went about our day. But it was not even real authority because he has no idea what authority I had, but his perspective was, you clearly have more authority with, so I'm going to let you walk in. So this category of influence, just because people look like they should be in charge or could be in charge, does not give people authority. Just because somebody is in a certain profession, sometimes, I was having a conversation with a friend recently, and we were discussing even like we sometimes we could put therapists on this pedestal, right? Like where or certain professions are against, whether it's, I think we no longer do it with athletes. There's so many things that have come out with athletes, so I don't think we put them on a moral pedestal. But other people we surely do, just because of who they are, even what they've accomplished. And we think, okay, this accomplishment or even this intelligence or even this degree means that they cannot fall or they cannot be in error. But that's off. And the idea is, just because somebody looks like they have the authority to make a decision for me, for you, for him, for her, does not mean they have the actual authority. So when somebody's, this is very, very, very important for you to be in tune with your own value system. If you value kindness and humility, and you value boundaries, and you value autonomy, and you value some of these things that are relevant for a human being, and if somebody's trying to move you out of your value system, again, in the Milgram study case, the value system of not causing pain to somebody for something, in this context, petty, of them getting a simple answer wrong for a paired words test. So what this just reminds me is what I would want. Again, I began this series yesterday describing the kind of advice I'd give to my younger sisters and how I would give them counsel in how to not be manipulated, and how to not be led astray just because somebody is an authority, and we've seen it, right? The gymnastics coach came out as, again, so much abuse that was happening behind the scenes. I don't know his name. I didn't get much into it, but I heard about it. But people, just because they have authority doesn't mean they're exempt from moral failure. And if we can understand that, no, that regardless of how educated, regardless of how much they've accomplished, regardless of how they dress, regardless of how they speak, it does not mean they cannot break, or they cannot fall, or they don't have weaknesses in their character that still need the appropriate conditions to keep them above water. So all of this to say, many of us have been disillusioned enough by people of that we considered high character falling, that I think we get this a whole lot. Sometimes when we haven't had enough experience, then we think, people, we sometimes we can expect perfection. But those of us who've been around for a minute, we've seen things happen. We've seen people fall, and even people. I mean, the amount of scandals that have been happening in the church setting, whether the church global or the church specific, that's something as well. So it's nobody's above moral failure. So we all need accountability. We all need a healthy component of not trusting yourself. That's straight from the Proverbs. Actually, let's go ahead and pull that up, and I'll go ahead and pull in BibleGateway.com and get us moved on over here so we can look at that text. So I'm going to type in the word trust here, and I know it's in the book of Proverbs. I believe it's in chapter 26, but I used a little system here just to help us find it real quick. Book of Proverbs, the word trust is used. Here we go, verse 28. Chapter 28, verse 26. And it's a little bit bigger, better. Does this one work? It does not. All right. The proverb simply says this. It says, those who trust in themselves are fools, but those who walk in wisdom are kept safe. So there's an appropriate amount of not trusting self that actually helps us. And when it comes to having the accountability in our lives. Saying all of this, as you work with people, walk with people, if you were trying to not be manipulated, you wouldn't give too much credit to how they're dressed, how they speak, what their educational background. And one of the research that I had read was about even doctors who would put up the difference between a doctor who would put up their educational achievements, where they graduated from in their office, versus those who didn't. And they began seeing some significant correlation and then even causation of just them having their credentials posted behind them, how that was significant for helping the patients to be more compliant to the directions they were giving them in following directions, right? In listening to that advice. So here's some of the interesting insight when you kind of study this out, is you realize even when people don't even consciously understand that they're being influenced by the authority that's on that wall, people still are. So even for me, right? Like, so I'm in, my little studio area of my house, but I have my books up, and that happened after I wrote my first book. This one over here, people had expressed different things to me about how that kind of had me at a different tier, and they put me on this different pedestal. And so I didn't realize that before I had wrote a book. After I wrote the book, then I began to realize that people almost saw the book like another degree, and people gave it a lot of credit, but it didn't mean it was a great book. I mean, I think it was a solid book, but it didn't mean it was a great book. But people gave me some of that credit, or again, we're talking about authority. People gave me extended the authority of influence, even if I may not have earned it. So I just mention all of this because if you're aware of our nature to allow people who have perceived authority to influence us, it could actually lead us in the wrong direction. I'll read one more text I think that's relevant from the book of Galatians. And this is, I think it's relevant because the Apostle Paul had this perspective. And when it came to interacting with the people in perceived authority. So let's go to chapter 2. And so I'm going to pick it up here in verse 1. So the Apostle Paul writing in Galatians, he says, then after 14 years, I went up to Jerusalem. This time with Barnabas, I took Titus along also. I went in response to a revelation and meeting privately with those esteemed as leaders. Think about that. Esteemed as I presented to them the gospel that I preach among the Gentiles. I wanted to be sure I was not running and had not been running my race in vain. Yet not even Titus, who was with me, was compelled to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek. This matter arose because some false believers had infiltrated our ranks to spy on the freedom we have in Christ Jesus and to make us slaves. Okay, here it goes. It gets coming up. Verse 5. We did not give in to them for a moment so that the truth of the gospel might be preserved for you. Verse 6. As for those who were held in high esteem, again, these are people who had this perceived authority. Whatever they were makes no difference to me. Whatever they were makes no difference to me. God does not show favoritism. They added nothing to my message. And you could go on in that story, but what I just wanted to highlight quickly was that just because people were held in high esteem or high authority, and I'm not, so let me make sure you understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying be dismissive of authority. I think one of the most important lessons that any person can learn early in life and early in their career is how to understand, respect, and honor authority that best helps them, that best helps you, that best helps the organization. If you don't get that, it's one of those key lessons that's going to hurt you continually throughout your life. But it's not allowing anybody in any position of authority to make you compromise your values. Again, all of my values, I've expressed this before, but I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown just as a quick reminder of where my values come from. And they're right here on this little flower petals. Scriptures from the Bible. We have the local masterminds. We have self-help books. And we have kind of my insight of my experience as we've gone along. If you wanted to put these in a hierarchy, it would be like this. Scriptures from the Bible up top. Best-selling self-help books. And that, even best-selling, I've began to modify that. It's going to be self-help books that are synthesized with synthesized and harmonized with my belief system. And then the local mentors and masterminds and my insight and experience. I mention all of that just because if you understand what your values are, and then you understand somebody in this perceived position of authority is trying to make me compromise my values, and we go, no. Just because you look like you have authority, just because you sound like you have authority, just because you have some education, it doesn't mean I'm going to give you. It doesn't mean I'm going to give you space to make me compromise my character or compromise my integrity. I'm going to stay true to my value system, even if it's in conflict with somebody who's in position of high authority or who has perceived authority. Anyway, that's the big one on that one is perceived authority. Very, very crucial, very, very important, and relevant for us today. Let's move into the second to the last point of the series of how not to be manipulated. And that point is social proof. Again, one of the things we said starting out, as you think about, again, if you're a business owner or someone who's seeking to be influential, you could take these principles in the positive sense and see how you can leverage them in your world. This series, I was thinking more, how can I help people to not be influenced if they don't want to be influenced? So social proof, if we're going to define it, it's the recommendations or endorsements from other people that make one thing, one experience, one person more believable or more trustworthy. Think Amazon. If you go to Amazon and you're placing an order, you might go through a number of items and be analyzing and assessing which of the items have the best reviews. You might think of quantity. You might think of, okay, well, how many reviews does this product have? Does it have 5,000? Does it have 10,000? And then you might even go through into the quality reviews. What are people actually saying about them? And the reason this is relevant, because we said in the very beginning that if the top brands with $1 million marketing budgets prioritize this in their world, where they insist on if the top brands, if they insist on certain practices, let's be aware that they're using these practices and they're using them for a reason, and they're using them because they work. So I'll spontaneously so Eric Thomas has a new book. He's one of the top 3 motivational speakers in the world. So if we pulled up Eric Thomas and we're able to go over and look up his new book on Amazon, and I haven't looked at his book on Amazon yet, so you all will be with me when I pull it up for the first time. And when I pull it up, what I want you to notice is he going to leverage social proof where other people have endorsed him? He often leverages Chris Paul as somebody who has endorsed him for his events, for his ability to help people get to the next level. But let's see so his new book is UOU, came out a couple of weeks ago. So he has 189 5-star reviews. So here in Amazon, one of the things you do, and I know this from having my book for sale, is you write your copy, your sales copy. Now, okay, check this out. So if you can see this is Michael B. Jordan said. So what happened probably with Eric Thomas behind the scenes is he either asked or he interacted with Michael B. Jordan, and Michael B. Jordan was willing to give Eric Thomas social proof. Michael B. Jordan gave Eric Thomas social proof. So here's what Michael B. Jordan said about Eric Thomas. He said, UOU is full of insight and guidance for those seeking their inner selves. Ed Milet, who's a podcast host and author, he said, no matter your story or your struggle, Eric Thomas, celebrated motivational guru, educator, and problem solver to many of the top athletes and business leaders, will help you work harder, discover your real motivation, and crack the code of enduring success. Think about this. One of the top 3 motivational speakers in the world. His books have sold in crazy numbers, and he still is using the principle of social proof to influence people to buy his books. When you begin, even in this book world, you begin to see how relevant social proof is in the world. So even when you might even look up events. So let me see if Eric Thomas has an event we can look up to see if we can see that Chris Paul endorsements. I'm going to put Eric Thomas event, see what we get. So we get one here on Google. All right, check it out. This is the 120 conference. I actually went to this conference thanks to my friend Joseph Warren in okay, here we go. So Eric Thomas 120 conference. Let's see if he leverages social proof. I know I've seen at least one of these where he leverages Chris Paul. Let's see if and who he leverages for an endorsement. Tabitha Brown, Lisa Bill Yu, CJ, Jenna, Jamal, Rory, Alex. Let's see. And this one, it doesn't seem like he has Chris Paul on this one. So, at least for this one, he did not. Let me see if I can pull up a Tony Robbins one. I'm curious now. Funny thing about doing some of this live is sometimes okay. Unleash your power within. Okay, so if we find this one, see if Tony Robbins. We have any? There was one of them that I was reading recently. He had like 3 different people, and it might have saved it. So I'll look it up real quick here as we're navigating some of this. Because every time I see some of these principles in the world, I try to take note of them. And oh, look, it's being done once again. Again, not in a bad way. I think some of these things are great tools. Yes, found it. Okay. I actually pulled clips from this. This is perfect. All right. Let me make this so you all can see this as well. Okay. Yeah. I actually had already clipped Eric Thomas and Tony Robbins and some of their leverage of social proof. So here's one from Tony Robbins. His Usher, world class performer. Again, it's almost like if you trusted this performer or you respect this performer and they extend their endorsement to somebody else. So Usher said, it doesn't matter what social status you are, what level you think you are at. Tony raises you to the top of your capabilities. That's Usher. Serena Williams, she said, with Tony's help, I've set new standards for myself and I've taken my tennis game and my life to a whole new level. Shaun White, professional snowboarder, said, I had no idea of the magnitude of his reach, his focus in life, in business, and contributions. All the things he does, I mean, it's incredibly impressive, and I was thankful to be a part of it. Eric Thomas, notice when they use, again, the MLB, NBA, NFL, Under Armour, Jordan, this is another form of social proof. In fact, if you're in the business world, you probably have already seen social proof come up where people are asking for or they're trying to sell you an opportunity so that your name could pull up on Times, or your name could pull up on Forbes, or your name could pull up on CNN or Fox. So they give you some more social proof. It's like this company trusted me to have an article about me on them, so maybe they'll trust maybe you trust me as well. So Chris Paul, here's the one that I was talking about earlier. So this is one of Eric Thomas's events. He leveraged Chris Paul's social proof to support his event. It says, when I think of ET, Eric Thomas, I think of pushing myself. ET is always somebody I know that's going to kick it to me straight. He just makes you be more than you think you can. When I think of ET, I just think of pushing myself. Whenever you think that you have gone as far as you can go a little further. Chris Paul, Phoenix Suns point guard. And then so I went to John Maxwell's page also as well. I'm a John Maxwell fan. And John Maxwell has Capital One, Walmart, Coca-Cola, Marines, IBM, Xerox as organizations he's worked with. All of this, why do people put this on their websites? Why do people put this on their event pages? Why do people use this? Because they're best practices that work. If somebody that you know trusts them, then it gives them that much more authority. That's why even what I do with BNI and being able to have business extended or referral based businesses that Business Network International carries value because social proof works. We want to know, does there somebody I know that trusts this person, that endorses this person? And maybe if that's true, maybe I could trust them. Now, on this side of it, again, maybe this is again to my younger sisters, my younger brothers, if I was giving them advice about how to not be influenced just because someone has social proof. Sometimes, I'm not saying any of these people were paid, but sometimes people are a part of social proof not because they actually believe in the product, but because they're compensated for the endorsement. Examples. If you go back, maybe we can even pull this up. That's the fun thing about doing stuff live and pulling up stuff online. I'm going to pull up one of the things that came out when Michael Jordan endorsed Wheaties back in the day. There's something that came out about him saying he doesn't eat Wheaties. Let me see if I can find that article for us. Right. and not immediately seeing it, so we won't get into it on this live stream. But what we will mention is that just because somebody endorses a product, and even one of the things you could see is McDonald's is leveraging this principle with some of their sandwiches, some of their fries, with some of the hip hop artists, and you can kind of see what they're doing. They're using the social proof of the hip hop artists to make their food relevant, to appeal to that certain generation of people. So that, again, you're thinking about marketing at that next level. If they're targeting a particular demographic, so if they're targeting whatever the demographic that will listen to this hip hop song, whatever. I think was it Travis Scott that had a McDonald's endorsement? Let me look that up real quick. Yeah, so Travis Scott had a meal at McDonald's, at least in 2020, is what this article is saying over here. The only reason I'm bringing that up is where the reason organizations do this is because they take somebody that you like, somebody you respect, somebody that you admire, and they're willing to pay them a brand deal to endorse their product. It doesn't mean that person necessarily eats that on a regular basis or on an ongoing basis, but they want the association to take place so that you will trust the brand even that much more. You want to be like your hero. You want to be like somebody you admire. That's a hip hop artist or that's an athlete. Okay, well then I'll also jump into be that much more likely to become a client. All right. So we've covered authority. We've covered social proof. I've showed you examples of some of the top dogs, some of the big time players using these principles to help them get ahead. And again, I'm saying these principles, again, I don't think these are more than, I use these principles in my business. If you have a business or you want to be in business, you might use these in your business. One of the reasons I was making this video is so people had access to this content wherever they are. So I'll put this in my catalog and they'll be able to go to YouTube or whatever and find this video and then use it, use the principles in a positive, ethical way. The concern, these principles are so powerful, you could use these in an unethical way, and it doesn't mean they would be less potent. They're still potent because they're neutral, they're amoral in nature. Having said that, let's go on to our last point, which is scarcity. Scarcity. Scarcity pops up whenever you have an item that is a limited time. Maybe it's a limited time offer. Maybe it's a limited product. Maybe it's a limited timetable. And maybe there's limited seats. So you have those maybe those three you kind of think about, at least for the time in this context. So Starbucks is one of them. I posted a couple of days ago about like their pumpkin spice latte. Their pumpkin spice latte is offered for a limited time only. It's a fall seasonal drink. So why would they do that when they're not short on pumpkin spice, right? They don't have a shortage on pumpkin spice. So it's not like they only could offer it in the fall, but when you have something that's a limited time only, you can incentivize people that much more to buy and purchase your product, program, or service. And again, you're going to see this done by some of the best in the business as well. So let's look at a few examples, and I think I have a few. I will. So some examples that you're familiar with or you might be familiar with. Let me pull up. McDonald's leverages this principle. I know I talked about McDonald's in the last point. I'll also bring it up here. Can you think of an item on the McDonald's menu that is a limited time only? Typically, when I'm doing this class, one of the first things, one of the examples I bring up is the example of the McRib. So I'll go ahead and type that in real quick. Okay, and it's just so funny when you see this stuff that's like very plainly saying what I'm teaching here. All right. McDonald's.com. When is the McRib coming back? I'll click on that. Let McDonald's teach us about scarcity. The McRib has limited availability. What did I just say? Limited availability. That's part of the reason why it's so special. We'll be sure to let you know when the McRib is back. In the meantime, you can try other favorites like the Big Mac. Why did I bring that up? I brought that up because it's a limited time only. McDonald's isn't short on pork or whatever mystery meat goes into the McRib. They're not short on the McRib. They're not like short on whatever meat, whatever product goes into that product, whatever ingredient goes into that. They're not short on it. But they know that having items on their menu that are limited time only incentivize the people to buy that much more readily. So how is this relevant to my younger brothers and sisters, that if I was giving advice to them to not be influenced and succumb to this tactic, is most limited time only offers, in my opinion, are not truly limited. And I'll explain a little bit more of this here. So sometimes there's a Labor Day only sale. Sometimes there's a Thanksgiving sale. And so what most of us have figured out is that there might be a sale, but guess what? In another holiday, another season, there's probably going to be another one that's exactly identical, maybe better, maybe the exact same, but there's going to be another sale, and it's truly not limited time only. Where as we'd go through all of this, let's look at a few more examples especially if you're in the event business, or I've done speeches and things like that, where it doesn't mean all of these things are truly unlimited. Again, so if a conference only, or a seminar only has 100 seats, they do only have 100 seats. Now, but it doesn't mean there's not going to be another seminar later on. So again, I don't think any of these things they're all amoral principles. If you're aware of the principles, you just know when you see a limited time only. Whataburger does that here in San Antonio in Texas. And they'll do their certain shake is a limited time only, and their certain burger, certain like guacamole burger, whatever, was limited time only. Whenever you see that, you just see, hey, this organization, they know the game, they're playing the game, and they're trying to influence with the game. I'm not mad at the game. I just want to be aware of the game, and I want to teach more people. That's the reason I did this series yesterday and today, to help people know the game so they're not negatively influenced by the game without that awareness. I really want people to be aware of what the tactics people use so that you're not manipulated by them. Let me see if there's additional things I want to share on this point on limiting beliefs. There we go. Kat Solis in the chat. Let me pull your comment up. Absolutely, right here. There we go. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, December. Absolutely. There might be a deal that's only there, but for the most part, there's going to be another sale. There's going to be another opportunity. It's not just Black Friday or Cyber Monday, and those things go crazy here in America for sure. Great insight, Kat. Been a minute. Good to see you. Appreciate you chiming in over here. Absolutely. So, the goal of this series was just that, help you to not be manipulated by some of the tactics that organizations, companies, people can use around you. And then again, if you're on the business side, or you're trying to be in a business side, these are principles you want to learn and use. Again, I've used I'll give you examples. Even when I printed out my books. So I'll give you this little story, background, and I'll probably create a whole video about this as well. When I first wrote my first book, and then I wanted to kind of stir it up and do something different, which was I printed out like I wrote the book before it was edited, and I printed out like 100 copies. I was like, and that's where I purposefully built in a limited time only. Like anybody who wanted that raw copy would get the could get that raw copy. Again, it hasn't been edited. It's again rough around the edges. If you wanted that almost straight from my journal into your hands, you could get that. It was limited time only. So you can build it into your business without it being problematic. But again, I don't think that's unethical. Then we edited it again. We edited it the first time, first run through as we were like building the team out. And then we had another limited version, which is that bold edition. And then, and I still have some of those, right? And then I have the champion edition, which is the most refined edition of the marriage book we did. So I did that not only with the marriage book, but with the coaching book, and then with the motivational speaking book as well. Yeah, there's limited time only, in not for any reason except I wanted to have one version that just came straight from me, and then one that was touched up and refined by my writer, my chief editor, and then my proofreader, which Luke Tolliver and Cynthia Nagel. Shout out to them for all of that support. And Kat over here showing, expressing the encouragement. I appreciate that. Great live. Keep up the great work. I appreciate that, the encouragement. I always appreciate that. We go way back to Nationwide days. We were in the training class together. Absolutely. With that said, if you have any questions about being manipulated or being or any of this marketing space, and once you know these 6 principles, and I'll just put up the PowerPoint so you can see them all over again. Whoops. I'm pressing the wrong button over here. Okay, there we go. There we go. Once you know these 6 principles, reciprocity, consistency. Reciprocity is being aware of somebody who's giving to you, or somebody who's giving you something for free, that they're psychologically in a position to influence you. Consistency is if you've said yes to a smaller commitment, you're more likely to say yes to a bigger commitment. You be aware of whenever you say yes to something, or don't say yes if you're not willing to say yes to something bigger from that person, entity, or company. Liking, that's when people are positioning themselves to be similar to you. Again, the best salesman, if you have your arms crossed, they'll cross their arms. If you're talking about your vacation, they'll talk about their vacation. You're talking about your kids, they'll talk about their kids. They're positioning themselves to be similar to you, and it can be completely authentic. It's not any problem. Authority, that's it's how people dress, how people carry themselves, how people speak, what people have done, showcasing their accomplishments. That establishes authority. Social proof is when people give that endorsement to one another, where we use that with Amazon, with the purchases we make there, or we even use it if you're pulling up Netflix. You're going, oh, what are the top 10? That's social proof. That's other people have endorsed these things and they're pushing them to you like that. And then 6 is scarcity, when people have that limited time only, to incentivize sales in one direction for a particular, again, product, program, or service, or a certain season. Again, Black Friday and Cyber Monday as well. With that said, if you have any questions about any of this, I'll be glad to do some more content. If you have questions, comments, and you want me to talk more about that, I will be glad to. But I'm going to wrap this video up. Thank you so much for the support. I'm excited about tomorrow's video. We'll be really aiming for that 9 to 11 slot and to keep that consistent moving forward. But appreciate you guys. Peace. You guys have a good night.